Hi class, this is our last recording for chapter 28. We're going to be focusing on methods of contraception. As we think of contraception, it's a broad blanket term that refers to anything which prevents pregnancy. And as we work through this process, I'm aware most of you are going to be future healthcare providers. So one of the things that I want to emphasize for you is how these methods of conception work. Some methods of conception are going to focus on preventing fertilization. Other methods of conception are going to focus on preventing implantation, and then some methods of conception are going to focus on removing the embryo or fetus even after implantation has occurred. So as we think of behavioral methods, these behavioral methods and barrier and spermicidal methods, these are all going to be focused on preventing fertilization. And fertilization never occurs. The individual can never be pregnant in the first place. So as we think of this, there's the classic abstinence. If you just don't have sex, and when we think of sex, I'm thinking of penile penetration of the vagina. So there's all kinds of other things you could do to stimulate those genitals. But as long as the penis doesn't go into the vagina, for having strict abstinence from vaginal intercourse, then you can't get pregnant. There's no fertilization that occurs. We also could have the rhythm method. This rhythm method is sometimes referred to as natural family planning. My mother refers to it as the get pregnant quick method. Apparently, I have a couple extra siblings because of the rhythm method. And when we think of the rhythm method, this is the idea that for a few days a month, or several days a month, the woman abstains from having penile penetration of the vagina, abstains from having sex, so that during that period of time while she's fertile, she doesn't have intercourse. And there's some key things we need to emphasize here. When we think of the male end of the spectrum, the sperm that the male is going to input into the female's reproductive tract, sperm can remain viable for 7 days in the woman's reproductive tract. And then when we think of the female end of the spectrum, that egg typically is viable for 1 day. So if the woman can know when she's going to ovulate, she needs to withhold from having sex, if she can predict when she's ovulating, not have sex for the 7 days leading up to ovulation, and then 1 day after ovulation. So you're looking at about 8 days a month of not having sexual intercourse with the rhythm method. Women who do this swear by it. I can think of 3 people off the top of my head who use the rhythm method, and they have exactly the number of children they were hoping for. They had no surprises, I should say. And those individuals usually have to stand on the scale every morning, record their weight, they have to record their body temperature every morning, and they also have to manually check their cervical mucus with their fingers, just to see the consistency of their cervical mucus. It requires diligence, and usually the reason the rhythm method doesn't work is because the individual practice that falls behind on the measurements. We also have the withdrawal method, referred to as coitus interrupted or interrupted sex, and this is the idea that the penis can penetrate the vagina and we can have pelvic thrusting occur for a little bit, but then it really relies on the male having a lot of self-control and withdrawing the penis and ejaculating outside of the woman's vagina. As you can imagine, individuals who depend on coitus interruptus as a method of birth control oftentimes become pregnant. As we look at barrier methods, these barrier or spermicidal methods are going to depend on keeping the sperm from getting in with a physical barrier or killing the sperm before they get in. So when we think of condoms, we have male and female condoms. Male condoms are a lot more pragmatic and a lot easier to apply than the female condoms, but it is possible for the female to wear a condom as well. It's just more difficult to apply a female condom correctly. If you are an individual who's going to be depending on condoms, I recommend that you spend some time practicing with a banana just to get comfortable with the application of that condom. When we think of the diaphragm or sponge methods, these are going to depend upon a barrier being inserted into the vaginal canal, blocking the sperm from getting access to the external os of the uterus. And oftentimes, those diaphragms or sponges will be paired with a spermicide. And the spermicide is just a chemical compound that will kill sperm. They could be in the form of a foam, a cream, or a jelly. And I'm thinking of the sponge in particular. A lot of times, you would take the spermicidal jelly, squirt it onto the sponge, and then insert the sponge into the woman's vaginal canal before having vaginal intercourse. All these methods, either behavior or burial, are going to focus on preventing fertilization from ever occurring. And let's clear the screen. We also have hormonal methods, and these hormonal methods vary. Usually, they're going to focus on preventing ovulation. And if there's no ovulation, then there can be no fertilization. So when someone says, I'm taking the pill, usually they're going to refer to a pill that has low concentrations of estrogen and low concentrations of progestin, which is the equivalent of progesterone. And they don't necessarily need to take an oral pill anymore. Now you can have a small injection, subcutaneous injection. You can have a little sticker patch. They even have cool pictures on them, so it's kind of fun looking. Or you can even have a vaginal ring impregnated with these hormones and inserted within the fornix of the vagina. These follicles, the ovarian follicles, don't maturate because the progesterone analog and the low concentrations of estrogen downregulate the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Something that's worth emphasizing is back in the 1960s and 1970s, when oral contraception first hit the market, they had much higher concentrations of both estrogen and progesterone within them. The full dose today would have been considered a low dose 30 years ago. And there's even just a progesterone-only option now that just has a low concentration of progesterone being released. And that particularly for women who are breastfeeding and also want to take oral contraceptions because they really don't want to have another kid right away. Oftentimes they'll take a progesterone-only birth control pill as opposed to progesterone paired with estrogen. We also have the morning after pill. This morning after pill is going to focus not on preventing fertilization, but instead it's going to focus on changing the chemical environment of the endometrium. So there's going to be a big high dose of estrogen and progesterone. So in case there hasn't been ovulation yet, that high dose of estrogen and progesterone will prevent ovulation, or hopefully prevent ovulation. And when there's the fall down after it being exposed to that high dose, particularly of the progesterone concentrations drop off, and that drop off of progesterone concentrations induces menstruation of the endometrium. So if there has been fertilization implantation, that the implanted blastocysts will be sloughed off with the endometrium. So in addition to inhibiting ovulation, it also induces menstruation and also inhibits the movement of sperm and egg. So the morning after pill is a multi-tiered approach. It downregulates ovulation. It keeps, if there has been ovulation, it makes it more difficult for sperm and egg to come in contact. And if sperm and egg are capable of fertilizing, it causes implantation to fail in the endometrium. And then we have RU46. RU486 is known is the technical name for the abortion pill. And this is an oral contraceptive that induces abortion up to 2 months into a pregnancy. And when we say abortion, this means that this method of birth control is going to rely on removing the embryo or the fetus. So killing the embryo or fetus and then having it pass. Depending on the timing. Because we're looking at the 2-month mark, if we were to use the technical jargon, up to 8 weeks or 2 months, we refer to it as an embryo, and then after that 2-month mark, we refer to it as a fetus. We also have IUDs, intrauterine devices, and IUDs, there's different flavors out there. Some IUDs are going to be hormonal only. Some IUDs are going to be hormonal and irritation combined. And what an IUD is a very tiny little device. Sometimes they're made of copper, sometimes, well, actually not that many of them are made of copper anymore. Usually they're going to be made of plastic now, or a more inert metal than copper. And they're going to be inserted into the uterus. And they irritate, primarily they function by irritating the uterine lining. And if the endometrium of the uterus is constantly being irritated, a fertilized egg, that blastocyst cannot implant, and the pregnancy does not proceed. some intrauterine devices are also going to be supplemented with hormones so that the hormones can be slowly released from those IUDs over time. And then there's the classic surgical sterilization. For the male anatomy, we call that a vasectomy, where the vas deferens or ductus deferens are sliced. For the female, instead of slicing the ductus deferens, which don't exist in the female anatomy, we are instead going to clamp off the fallopian or uterine tubes to prevent the oocyte from getting into the uterus and to prevent the sperm from getting to the oocyte. That's all we have for this recording on contraception. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. And as always, happy studies.